While living with some friends, I got up late at night to get a drink of water from the kitchen. I didn't turn on any lights, having no trouble navigating in the dark. As I crossed through the living room, I heard some movement type noise or something and assumed it was one of my roommate's pet cats. Go to the kitchen, drink water, leave kitchen. On my way back through the living room, I hear movement noises a lot louder than an old cat should make, and I glance around. There on the couch, in the very dark living room, is a shape. Roughly child-sized, with bright red eyes staring directly at me. I froze. The fear was so sudden and strong that it is in fact giving me goosebumps now. I very slowly stepped backwards, not daring to even blink as I watched the red orbs watch me. After several agonizingly long seconds, I reached the kitchen light switch, ready to defend myself when this goblin thing was sure to attack me. Click. It was my other roommate's chinchilla. It had opened its cage and escaped from their room. It was sitting on top of a pile of laundry.
Terrifyingly fluffy.
That's a chinchilling tale.
I moved into a new place in a new county. After a night at the pub, I got the feeling I was being followed. Turned around, huge black dog with red eyes glaring at me. I ran home, locked the doors, then I started getting nightmares about the thing hunting me down. And every time I was out at night, it was getting closer and closer. I put it down to the stress of moving, well, until a friend of mine stayed the night to ease my mind. I found her awake at 3 a.m. looking out the window, dog outside. She was pale as a sheet. She just whispered, "That's a fucking hellhound." In the morning, she ran out of my house, came back a few hours later with this awful smelling powder, and hung it up in pouches around the room, with an extra pouch for me to carry. Never seen the dog again. Never had a nightmare about it since. Anyway, since then, I've asked my friend about the powder. Local all-natural sea salt, sulfur, graveyard dirt, ground pandan leaves, dog hair, garlic powder, and the ashes of some other herbs and spices. Coincidentally, she said salt, pepper, pandan, and garlic make a great all-purpose seasoning.
My bedroom is on the second floor of the house. There's no patio/porch/overhang of any kind beneath my windows. A couple of years ago I was watching TV in bed around 2 a.m. and heard a louder than usual animal sound. Not uncommon to hear squirrels running around on the roof from time to time. Didn't think much of it. Kept on happening, and started to sound awfully close to the window and not on the roof. I ignored it for a pretty long time. After at least 40 to 45 minutes of being irritated by the noise. Best guess, I had watched a couple of episodes of South Park on my DVR during the time span. I banged on the wall in hopes of scaring them off until I could get to sleep. Just 2 quick bangs with my fist, which were answered with 2 bangs on the wall right next to the window from outside. Needless to say, I just about shit and jumped out of bed. Now, my living room has a bay window, and is on the other end of the house, so I could look out that window from the side and see my bedroom window. I hustle downstairs and peek out. I see a guy standing in front of my house, below my bedroom window. He's got a knife, small pocket knife, in his hand, and he's petting the front of my house. Call the police and wait. He never leaves the front of the house even when they roll up and ultimately disarm and arrest him without much struggle.
At 20 my mom lived in Mill Valley in California. It being 1980, California, especially the Bay Area, was a hotbed for both serial rapists and killers. They were all over the place. Zodiac, the Hillside Strangler, the Vampire of Sacramento, you name him, he was here. Anyway, one night my mom, who was a beautiful little Swedish girl, is going pee in her bathroom and hears this rustling noise outside her window. She doesn't think anything of it at first, but then the bush directly under the window starts moving rapidly. She assumed it was a raccoon for a second, but then she saw the top of a man's hat peeking through the glass. Someone was watching her. Not stopping to think, she pulls up her pants and chargers outside screaming at him. He ran off into the night. Next day, a girl was found strangled in her bathroom a few streets down. Could have been unrelated, but she still thinks about it from time to time. Any single woman should have a giant dog. That's my theory.
When I was in 5th grade, some guy who was mentally ill had a meltdown somewhere in Chicago. Apparently he shot and killed some random guy and stole his car. He drove up I-94 towards my suburb, got off the highway, and drove straight into my neighborhood. It's very close to the exit, and just started shooting sporadically at people's houses. He somehow wound up in my backyard, which is full of trees by the way, and was just shooting in every direction. I can still vividly remember brake lights in the middle of the otherwise pitch black woods and sparks from the gunfire going off in every direction. The cops showed up and shot him to death. Luckily no one was hurt, but my neighbors did find a bullet in the middle of their mattress. Fireworks are not so fun anymore.
The cops showed up and shot him to death. Luckily no one was hurt. Had a chuckle at that one.
We moved into a new house a few months ago. As we were in the process of purchasing the house, the renter who was living in it died unexpectedly of natural causes in his mid-40s. He died right in the middle of the living room. Shortly after, we move into the house, and almost immediately our 2-year-old daughter starts talking about the ghost that lives in our house. Now let's be real here, she is 2 and 2-year-olds are very impressionable. Halloween had recently passed, and she had this Halloween-themed picture book that she loved to read. So it's entirely possible that all this talk of ghosts was just coming from looking through that book on a regular basis. Still, she was always telling me that the ghost was in her playhouse in the basement, or that the ghost was on the stairs, or that the ghost was standing in the corner. She never seemed to be afraid of the ghost, and considered him to be her friend, so I wasn't all that concerned even if there really was a ghost haunting our house. If he's a nice and helpful ghost, it could certainly be a lot worse. I would often tell the ghost that he was welcome to stay if he wanted to, but he was also welcome to go if that would make him happier. I was about 30-70 on the ghost being real and she could see and talk to him versus the ghost being just her imagination fueled by her Halloween book. Until one day, when we were going out to the car to go to daycare in the morning. It was still dark out, and rainy. My daughter told me that the ghost was on the back deck, and then she told me that today was the ghost's birthday and she wanted to sing him happy birthday. Once again, I mostly disregarded what she was saying, as she is birthday obsessed and has in the past made us sing happy birthday to Mickey Mouse, a bowl of fruit snacks, and the bathroom. So we sang and wished the ghost a happy birthday and went on with our lives. Later that day, out of pure curiosity, I looked up the obituary of the man who had died in our house, and wouldn't you know it? It was his fricking birthday.
Upvote for singing happy birthday to a bowl of fruit snacks.
I have 4 little cousins who never got to meet my grandfather. He passed before they were born. One morning, they ran downstairs for breakfast as they usually do. As my uncle was getting their food ready, one pointed to the fridge and said, "That's him." My uncle, not thinking much of it, said, "Who?" and looked over. They were pointing at a picture of my grandfather that they never got to meet. My cousin responded, "The man that comes and talks to us at night until we fall asleep sometimes." Not horrifying, but still, eerie.
My great-grandfather passed away when I was around 5. And so as it was just my mom and I after her divorce, she took me up to Leeds to attend the funeral with her. Both of us were upset and so we slept in the same bed as Mom felt heartbroken and I was just upset. Though never was one as a child to share my parents' bed, just this one occasion. Fast forward to the very early hours of the day of the funeral. Around 3 a.m. and, although I don't remember doing it, my mom says I sat bolt upright in bed, wide awake, and started talking to someone. She didn't dare interrupt even though it freaked her out loads. And just lay there in bed listening to me talk to my great-grandmother, who had passed away in 1981, 14 years before I was born.
Yeah, this is exactly what I want to be reading at 3 a.m., in my bed. In Leeds. This story is not mine, it's my grandfather's. Backstory: this takes place in West Virginia in the 20s. My grandpa is the youngest of 9 and his family is very poor. They all live in a one-room house. My grandpa's sister suddenly got sick and quickly fell into a coma. They say she had a fever and would shake and even sit up in the middle of the night even though she was not conscious. She got progressively worse over the next few days and needed some sort of help. My grandpa and his oldest sister Glenna stayed behind while the rest of the family went to the neighbor's house 10 miles down the road for some food and medicine. As soon as the family got home that night, their mom went to the sister's bed and started to put a cold cloth on her head. Immediately her eyes flew open for the first time in days, and she looked her mother right in the eyes and said, "The Lord wants Glenna." She fell back and twitched before going back into unconsciousness. The next morning Glenna and the sister had died. The younger sister died from the fever, and Glenna died from unknown causes. So I had this whistle that was pretty shit. It was super obnoxious, with this terrible, but very distinctive, sound. It was like the death cry of a goose, followed by a rattling noise. It always hung off a bright orange lanyard, which I'd hook on the door handle of my front door. Every morning, I'd get up and see the awful whistle hanging from my door. Now, right next to my front door was a window that didn't quite latch. It wasn't open all the time, but if you pushed on it for long enough, it would give way. One night, it was raining hard as hell. I woke up at 4 a.m. to the sound of banging downstairs. I assumed the wind had blown the window open, and I didn't want the carpet to get soaked, so I got up and went to close it up again. Sure enough, the window was wide open. As I went to close it, I heard something out the window. In the distance, I heard the fucking whistle. It was gone. The lanyard and the whistle were off the handle, and someone was blowing the whistle somewhere out in the storm. I checked the house top to bottom. Nothing else was stolen. Just the whistle. I fixed the window.
I was at my uncle's apartment and this rustling, scratching sound started. I figured it was some animal outside and waited for it to stop. It did, but it'd start back up every 15 minutes. Then I became convinced that it was in the room with me. I walked around the room and looked in all the corners and couldn't find anything. So I said fuck it, it's just a poltergeist, and ended up getting about 30 minutes of sleep total that night since the noise never stopped. In the morning, he asks how I slept. I said I didn't because of the weird scratching noise. He pulls a hedgehog from behind the TV. Edit, hedgehog was in a glass tank behind the TV.
Imagine it from the hedgehog's point of view. He is desperately trying to escape, but this enormous monster keeps searching for him. Every time the beast comes near, he sits motionless, praying that this godlike being who will almost certainly devour him can't see him. Then the lights go back out, and he slowly musters the courage to try and move on before it all happens again. This is for my parents. I was about 3 years old, and it was way past my bedtime. But I was restless, and I snuck out of my bed and made my way to the living room, where my parents were watching a documentary about World War II. I remember hearing things like Hitler and Luftwaffe and Messerschmitt. Now, to a child, toddler who had a trouble enunciating hard consonants, those words were actually very easy to replicate and sound out. Then I heard my parents talking to each other, idly wondering if the pilots all bought into that evil bad man Hitler's lies and how some of the pilots felt if they had a conscience at all. Anyways, the next day, I drew a crude plane on a piece of paper and was making airplane noises like I had overheard on TV. According to my mother, I never had expressed any interest in planes. Had no exposure to planes before, at least, not to her knowledge. So she was curious why I would suddenly draw a plane out of the blue. It's my plane. Oh, it's your plane? Yeah. My plane. It's Messerschmitt. What? Messerschmitt, Mama. I was in the Luftwaffe. Honey, where did you hear those words? I wanted to do good, but Hitler made me bad. Then I had to go away for a while, but now I'm here. Anyways, for years my parents were convinced that I was a reincarnated soul of a World War II German pilot. It wasn't until fairly recently that I had a random recall of the whole thing and told my parents. Everyone was very amused.
Hunting with father-in-law. It's well before sunup, maybe 5 a.m., and we hiked to a patch of trees and sat down. Him maybe 70 yards south of me with me facing out into a clearing. He had a flashlight and I didn't have one on me at the time. It was so dark you couldn't see a hand in front of your face. After about 20 minutes, I hear something really big walking maybe 10 yards in front of me. From the sound of the leaves/branches breaking, it sounded human-sized. It startled me and I loudly call for my father-in-law to turn on the flashlight. Right in front of me, where the noise was coming from, I hear his voice say, "Nah, it's cool." The noise happened again about 10 minutes later and I called out to him, assuming it was him making the noise. No response, So I made my way over to his camp and asked him if he had just walked near me. He said he hadn't gotten up the whole time, and was confused why I would have heard his voice. Skinwalkers, man.
My paternal grandmother died when I was 6. I lived in NY. She lived in PA. I met her maybe twice. I was 6 years old, asleep in bed one night, and for whatever reason I woke up and walked into my parents' bedroom. My father had an easy chair in one corner for reading. I sat in the chair. On the opposite wall was my father's closet. It opened, and Grandma came out and stood about 6 feet away. "I just wanted to say goodbye," she said, smiled, waved, and turned back and walked back into the closet, closing the door behind her. I went back to my room. About 2 hours later, about 6 a.m., the phone rings. It was a call from PA that Grandma Catherine had died in her sleep. My mother came to wake me up to tell me, and I said, "I know." "What do you mean?" "She came to say goodbye last night. She made me repeat the story 3 times, and then told me never, ever to tell my father that story. And I never did."
Kind of a no sleep for a short while. One Halloween, a couple of groups from the neighborhood got into an egg fight. None of us hated each other, just in different cliques. As the opposing forces started to march forward, we took off running to retreat to a safer distance. As we entered the woods, I quickly bolted behind a tree and everyone from the opposing side passed me by. Or at least I thought. Apparently Bill got caught by a branch and was trying to free himself. I got from behind the tree to give him a hand since he was having a hard time. Right as I got to him, he looked up and our eyes locked. He had a true look of horror in his eyes. I asked him if he needed some help and he muttered very lowly, "Yeah. Sure." So we got him loose and I ran off to rejoin the fight. Next day in school, someone walked up and said, "Is what Bill said true?" Being a smart ass, I said, "Yup," and walked off. Then it happened a second time, then a third and fourth. I responded yup each time. I'd be lying if I didn't say that I was curious as to what they were talking about, but I just played along since everyone asked it the same way. As if they are finding out that ghosts really do exist. So at lunch I see Bill walk up and say, "Hey Bill, I have a question." He mutters lowly, "Yeah, what?" I respond, "Why is everyone asking me if what you said is true?" He said, "Okay, it was the weirdest thing. You weren't there. Next thing I know, you're standing in front of me. You just appeared out of thin air. I know there must be an explanation, but dude, you were not there. I know you weren't." I laughed and told him I was behind the tree and saw that he was stuck and just stepped out to help. He puts his hand on my shoulder and breathes a sigh of relief. He said, "Jesus Christ, I was scared to death. I've been telling the story to see if anyone else had this happen with you. For a while I could disappear and appear randomly. Not me, but I was there. About 2 years ago, my fiancé and I stayed in the haunted room of a hotel. The story is that a woman committed suicide in the room in the early 20th century after her husband or fiancé died at sea. I don't believe in ghosts and still do not, but she does and claims she has psychic sensitivity. Well, we go to sleep, and frankly, it was one of the best night's sleep I ever had. When I got up in the morning, my fiancé was exhausted. She said the ghost of the woman appeared several times in the night. Each time she would be standing at the foot of the bed, walk to my side, bend down and look at me, then walk out of the room.
Your fiancé is jelly. Delete the Lloyd Jim up and hit Facebook. My daughter slept in the bed with me for a few years after her father and I had divorced. Probably ages 3 through 6 or so. My bed was against the wall, and she slept on the side of the wall. I slept on my side facing her, so my bathroom was to my back. We had not fallen asleep yet, but had just been laying there being quiet and still. All of a sudden, she says, "Mommy, why is there a man standing behind you?" My body turned ice cold, and it felt like all of the blood drained out of my body. I finally got up the nerve to turn over and look. There was nobody there. She had said it so seriously, but the little toot was totally joking. I have never been so scared in my life, and to this day I will not sleep with my back facing that bathroom door. This was 13 years ago.
And that is exactly why I do not want children.
I once said the exact same thing when I was hanging out in bed with my parents. Except there really was a man standing there, in our house, staring at our family. Turns out he was strung out looking for things to steal. Perhaps the most terrifying moment of my life.